I never expected that a burst pipe would be the thing to dismantle the life I had so carefully constructed. For years, my world existed within the clean, predictable lines of my apartment and the glowing rectangle of my monitor. I was a graphic designer, a profession that suited my temperament perfectly. I could create order from chaos, distill complex ideas into simple, elegant forms, all from the quiet safety of my home. My life was a fortress of solitude, and I was its contented king. The walls were high, the moat was deep, and no one ever got close enough to see the loneliness that paced the battlements. Then I met Julian. He was a client, an architect starting his own firm after years at a large, corporate one. He needed branding, a logo, a digital presence, the kind of work I excelled at. Our first meeting was in my apartment, my sterile, gray and white space that I usually felt so proud of. But when Julian walked in, he seemed to absorb all the light and color, leaving the room feeling washed out and small. He was tall, with shoulders that seemed to strain the fabric of his simple Henley shirt. His hands were large, calloused, and dusted with something that looked like drywall powder, a stark contrast to my own, which were perpetually clean and smelled faintly of antiseptic soap. He moved with a quiet, deliberate confidence that I envied. He spoke in a low, rumbling voice that resonated in my chest, a calm and steady sound that made the anxious hum in my own head quiet down for a few precious moments. His scent filled my small living room, a mix of freshly sawn wood, coffee, and something clean and masculine, like Irish spring soap. It was a scent that spoke of creation, of building things with your own two hands, of a life lived in the physical world. It was everything my life was not. I cataloged him the way an art historian might catalog a masterpiece, admiring every detail from a safe, academic distance. The way his dark hair curled just behind his ears, the crinkles that formed at the corners of his eyes when he smiled at one of my design concepts, the low, thoughtful hum he made when he was studying a proof. He was a piece of art I could admire but never touch, a vibrant painting in a world I had intentionally rendered in monochrome. The barrier between us felt as solid and immovable as a mountain range. He was my client, first and foremost, a line I would never cross. But the more significant barrier was the one I erected in my own mind. He was, for all intents and purposes, a man who moved through the world with an ease that suggested a life filled with friends, with family, with a partner who waited for him at home. He mentioned a partner once, a fleeting reference in a conversation about holiday plans. David and I always used to escape the city around this time, he had said, his voice tinged with a wistful sadness that I misinterpreted completely. I pictured a Danielle, a beautiful, effortless woman who smelled of flowers and laughter. The thought settled like a stone in my stomach. He was straight. Of course he was. Men like Julian, men who were like sunlight and solid earth, were never for men like me, who were all shadow and carefully curated emptiness. So I kept him at a distance, safely categorized as unattainable. Our interactions were confined to emails and scheduled video calls. I poured all my yearning into his project, crafting a logo that was as strong, elegant, and balanced as he was. I designed a website that was clean but warm, professional but deeply human. I was creating a digital reflection of the man I couldn't have, and the work was the best I had ever done. It was my silent, secret love letter, written in code and pixels. My routine was my religion. Wake at 6:30. Coffee at 6:45. Work from 7 until noon. A simple lunch of soup and a sandwich. Work from 1 until 5. A solitary dinner. A book or a film. Sleep. Repeat. It was a life devoid of surprises, and that was its primary virtue. The predictability was a balm on my anxious soul. Each day was a perfect replica of the one before, a long, unbroken chain of quiet, controlled moments. It was a fragile peace, but it was mine. The disruption, when it came, was not a gentle knock at the door, but a violent shattering of my carefully constructed world. It started as a faint dripping sound, a minor annoyance I tried to ignore. But the dripping became a trickle, and the trickle became a gush. I found the source in my hallway closet, a torrent of rusty water pouring from a burst pipe, soaking the carpet, warping the baseboards, and filling my sanctuary with the smell of damp and decay. It was chaos, a visceral, unstoppable flood that I could do nothing to contain. My landlord was apologetic but firm. The damage was extensive. The entire unit would need to be dried out, the drywall replaced, the flooring torn up. It would take weeks, maybe longer. I stood in my ruined apartment, the orderly grid of my life dissolving into a muddy puddle at my feet, and felt a wave of panic so profound it stole the air from my lungs. I had a deadline. Julian's final brand package was due in 3 days. My computer, my monitors, my entire professional existence was in this waterlogged box. I called him, my voice trembling, trying to sound professional as I explained the situation and requested an extension. I expected disappointment, perhaps a bit of professional frustration. Instead, his voice came through the phone, that low, steady rumble, cutting through my panic. "Leo, where are you now?" "At a coffee shop," I said, my voice small. "I managed to save my hard drives, but the rest of my equipment is probably ruined." There was a pause, and I could hear the sound of him thinking, the faint scratching of a pencil on paper in the background. "My guest room is empty," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "The whole house is still a bit of a construction site, but the room is clean and it has a good desk. There's a spare monitor you can use. Come here. You can finish the project without any more interruptions." The offer was like a life raft thrown to a drowning man, but my first instinct was to refuse. To accept was to let him into my mess, to trade my ruined fortress for a place in his world. It was terrifying, but the alternative, failing my client, holing up in a sterile hotel room, completely adrift, was worse. "Are you sure?" I asked, the words barely a whisper. "I don't want to impose." "It's not an imposition," he said, his voice softening. "It's a solution. I'll text you the address. Just come." He hung up before I could protest further. The address came through a moment later. My world, which had been spinning out of control, suddenly had a new, terrifying, and magnetic center, and I was driving straight toward it. Julian's brownstone was on a quiet, tree-lined street, a beautiful old building that was clearly a work in progress. The front steps were new, unpainted wood, and a large dumpster sat by the curb. He met me at the door, wiping his hands on a rag tucked into the waistband of his jeans. He was wearing the same kind of Henley, this one gray and smudged with plaster dust. The scent of sawdust was even stronger here, mingled with the clean, sharp smell of paint. "Glad you made it," he said, his smile genuine and warm. He took one of my bags before I could object, his fingers brushing against mine. The contact was brief, accidental, but it sent a jolt through my system, a spark of electricity on my cold skin. It was the first time we had ever touched. The inside of the house was a testament to his nature, controlled chaos. Tools were neatly arranged on a canvas drop cloth. Blueprints were tacked to one wall, but the space itself felt open and full of potential. Light streamed through the large, uncovered windows. It was a space in the process of becoming, a place that was alive and breathing. It was the complete opposite of my apartment, which had felt more like a pristine, airless tomb. "Sorry for the mess," he said, gesturing around the open-plan ground floor. "Living in a renovation isn't exactly glamorous." "It's beautiful," I said, and I meant it. I could see the vision, the strong bones of the house he was bringing back to life. He led me upstairs to the guest room. It was an oasis of calm in the midst of the construction. The walls were painted a soft, soothing gray, the floors were polished dark wood, and a large, comfortable-looking bed was neatly made. A simple wooden desk sat under the window, and next to it, as promised, was a large, high-resolution monitor. "The bathroom is just across the hall," he said, setting my bag down by the bed. "Make yourself at home. Seriously, kitchen's always open. Let me know if you need anything at all." He lingered for a moment at the door, his presence filling the room. "I'm glad you're here, Leo. We'll get this project finished." Then he was gone, and I was left alone in his space. I sank onto the edge of the bed, the mattress far softer than my own. The room smelled of him, not just the sawdust and paint from downstairs, but his personal scent, the clean soap and faint cologne, which seemed to have seeped into the very fabric of the place. It was in the pillows, the clean sheets, the soft towel left for me on the chair. I was surrounded by him, breathing him in. The walls of my fortress had not just been breached, they had been washed away entirely. I was adrift in his ocean, and the tide was pulling me in. Living in Julian's house was a study in sensory overload. My world, once a silent film, was now in full, overwhelming color and sound. I became acutely aware of the rhythm of his life, a rhythm that soon imposed itself on my own. I woke not to my sterile alarm clock, but to the faint scent of coffee brewing downstairs and the low rumble of his shower. The sounds of the house were a constant, comforting presence. The soft thud of his footsteps on the floorboards, the murmur of his voice on a business call, the scratch of his pencil across drafting paper in the evenings. My carefully managed solitude was gone. We existed in a state of quiet, constant proximity. We worked in separate rooms during the day, but the knowledge of his presence just a wall away was a low, electric hum beneath my skin. The narrow upstairs hallway became a treacherous space. We would brush past each other on the way to the bathroom, a fleeting contact of shoulders or arms that left my skin tingling for minutes afterward. I started to hold my breath when I heard him approaching, my heart hammering against my ribs in a frantic, panicked rhythm. He was an effortless host. He seemed to understand my need for space, never crowding me, but he also refused to let me retreat completely into myself. He would appear at my door in the late afternoon with a mug of tea. "Thought you might need this," he would say, his voice a soft intrusion into my focused silence. I would take the mug, our fingers brushing for a fraction of a second, a silent, explosive moment that I would replay in my mind for hours. In the evenings, he would cook. Simple, hearty meals that we ate at the makeshift dining table in his half-finished kitchen. The first night, I tried to retreat to my room with my plate, citing my deadline. But he stopped me with a gentle firmness. "Eat with me, Leo. You need a break," and so I stayed. Our conversations were quiet, revolving mostly around work, but in the silences, I found myself watching him. The way he moved around the kitchen, the concentration on his face as he chopped vegetables, the way the dim, overhead light caught the silver threads beginning to appear at his temples. Each small interaction was a stone dropped into the still pool of my emotions, sending ripples out to the farthest shores. One evening, I was hunched over my laptop at the kitchen table, wrestling with a particularly difficult design element, my shoulders tight with stress. Julian came to stand behind me, looking over my shoulder at the screen. I froze, every muscle in my body tensing at his closeness. I could feel the warmth radiating from his body, could smell the clean scent of his soap. He was so close I could hear him breathe. "Try shifting the kerning on the subheader," he murmured, his voice low and close to my ear. He reached past me, his arm brushing against my back, and took the mouse. His large, warm hand covered mine as he guided it, making the adjustment on the screen. The problem was instantly solved, but I barely registered it. All I could feel was the weight and heat of his hand on mine, the pressure of his fingers intertwined with my own. My heart felt like it was going to beat its way out of my chest. The touch lasted for no more than 5 seconds, but it recalibrated my entire universe. He released my hand and stepped back as if nothing had happened. "Better?" he asked. I could only nod, unable to find my voice. That night, I lay in the guest bed, the ghost of his touch still burning on my skin, and felt a profound and terrifying sense of hope. The walls I had built around my heart were crumbling, and I was not sure if I wanted to rebuild them. The glimpse behind his calm facade came on the third night. The deadline had been met. I had sent off the final files, and a wave of both relief and melancholy washed over me. My reason for being here was gone. Soon, I would have to leave this strange, warm, chaotic bubble and return to my life, whatever was left of it. I found Julian in his study, a room lined with books and rolled-up blueprints. He was not working. He was sitting in a worn leather armchair, a glass of amber liquid in his hand, staring at a framed photograph on his desk. He looked up as I entered, and for the first time, I saw something other than quiet confidence in his eyes. I saw a deep, profound sadness, a weariness that seemed to settle into the lines of his face. He looked unguarded, vulnerable. "Come in," he said, his voice quieter than usual. I hesitated at the door. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to intrude." "You're not intruding." He gestured to the chair opposite him. I sat, the silence stretching between us, thick with unspoken things. He followed my gaze to the photograph on his desk. It was of him and another man, both of them younger, smiling, with their arms around each other on a windswept beach. "That's David," Julian said, his voice thick with emotion. "He was my partner. in business, and in everything else. The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. David, not Danielle. My carefully constructed narrative, the one that had kept him safely in the unattainable category, shattered into a million pieces. The wistful sadness I had heard in his voice that day, the quiet melancholy I sometimes saw in his eyes, it was not for a woman. It was for him, for the man in the photograph. We started our first firm together, right out of school. Julian continued, his gaze lost in the past. Built it from the ground up. He was the visionary, the one with the wild, brilliant ideas. I was the one who figured out how to make them stand. We were a good team. He took a slow sip of his drink. He got sick. It was fast. One minute we were planning a project in Spain, the next, he was gone. He looked at me, his eyes searching my face. This new firm, it's the first thing I've built on my own. Without him, it's terrifying. In that moment, he was no longer the confident, capable architect, the untouchable man I had placed on a pedestal. He was just a person, carrying a heavy burden of grief, trying to find his way forward. My admiration, which had been a distant, aesthetic appreciation, deepened into something far more potent, something that felt dangerously like empathy, like connection. I saw the cracks in his armor, and instead of making him seem weaker, they made him seem infinitely more real, more human. And my heart, my stupid, walled-off heart, ached for him. I did not know what to say. The usual platitudes felt hollow and insulting, so I just sat with him in the quiet, sharing the weight of his silence. The distance between us had collapsed. We were no longer client and designer, host and guest. We were just two men, sitting in a dimly lit room, surrounded by the ghosts of the past and the uncertain blueprint of the future. And for the first time, I felt the terrifying possibility that the future might just include us. The final pieces of my composure crumbled the next evening. My landlord had called with bad news. The water damage was worse than they thought. They had found mold. The remediation would take at least a month, maybe two. The news landed like a punch to the gut. My fortress was not just breached, it was gone, razed to the ground. The one place in the world that was mine, the one place I felt safe, was contaminated and uninhabitable. The fragile tether that connected me to my old life snapped. I ended the call and stood in the middle of the guest room, the phone slipping from my numb fingers. A wave of dizziness washed over me. The quiet hum of anxiety that was the constant soundtrack to my life crescendoed into a deafening roar. My carefully constructed order had been annihilated by a random act of plumbing. I had no home. My work was done, so I had no reason to be in Julian's house. I was untethered, floating in a void, and the sheer, overwhelming reality of it all was too much to bear. My breath hitched. My chest tightened, a steel band constricting around my lungs. The room started to spin, the soft gray walls closing in on me. I slid down the wall, curling into a ball on the floor, my knees pulled up to my chest. A sob tore its way out of my throat, a raw, ugly sound that I did not recognize as my own. And then another, and another. The tears came, hot and unstoppable, a flood of all the fear and loneliness and stress I had been holding back for days, for years. I was crying for my ruined apartment, for my shattered routine, for the terrifying, hopeless crush I had on the man downstairs. I was crying because for the first time in a very long time, I had allowed myself to feel something other than a carefully managed numbness, and it was breaking me apart. I did not hear him come in. I only knew he was there when the floorboards creaked beside me. I flinched, trying to make myself smaller, trying to hide the pathetic, broken mess I had become. I was mortified, ashamed of this utter loss of control in his house, in his presence. He did not say a word. There were no useless questions, no empty reassurances. He simply knelt on the floor in front of me, and then he was sitting beside me, his back against the same wall. He did not touch me, not at first. He just sat there, a solid, grounding presence in my swirling vortex of panic. He was just there, breathing, existing, a lighthouse in my storm. After a few moments that felt like an eternity, he shifted, turning toward me. He reached out, slowly, as if not to startle a frightened animal, and placed a hand on my shoulder. The touch was firm, steady. It was an anchor. Through the thin fabric of my shirt, I could feel the warmth of his palm, a small point of heat in my cold, shaking world. He gently pulled me toward him, and I went without resistance, my body too exhausted to fight. I collapsed against him, my head finding the space on his broad shoulder, my face buried in the rough cotton of his shirt. And he just held me. His arms came around me, pulling me securely against his chest. One hand rested on my back, moving in slow, soothing circles, while the other cradled the back of my head, his fingers tangling gently in my hair. I could feel the solid, steady beat of his heart against my ear, a slow, powerful rhythm that seemed to coax my own frantic pulse into slowing down. I could smell his scent, sawdust and soap, and that clean, masculine warmth, and it was the most comforting thing I had ever known. I cried into his shirt, my sobs quieting from ragged gasps into shuddering breaths, and he just held me, absorbing my grief, my panic, my despair, without judgment, without question. Time seemed to dissolve. There was only the darkness of his shirt, the solid warmth of his body, the steady beat of his heart, and the secure pressure of his arms around me. He was a wall, but not one that kept me out. He was a wall that was holding me up, protecting me from the storm inside my own head. My tears subsided, leaving me feeling hollowed out, raw, and strangely peaceful. I was boneless against him, completely surrendered to his quiet strength. I should have pulled away. I should have mumbled an apology and retreated into my shame. But I could not. I felt safer in his arms than I had ever felt in my own home. I shifted slightly, my breathing evening out, but I did not move away. And he did not let go. The quality of the silence changed. The air, which had been thick with my distress, now grew heavy with a different kind of tension. It was a quiet, humming energy that seemed to emanate from where our bodies were pressed together. I became aware of every point of contact, my cheek against the muscle of his chest, my hand resting on his thigh, the way his breath stirred my hair. The hand on my back stopped its soothing circles and simply rested in the small of my back, a point of focused, searing heat. He shifted, pulling back just enough to look at me. His other hand came up to my face, his thumb gently wiping away the last of my tears from my cheek. His touch was incredibly tender. His eyes, dark and serious in the dim light of the room, searched mine. They were not filled with pity. They were filled with something else, something deeper, something that made my breath catch in my throat. It was a question. My heart, which had just calmed, began to pound again, but this time it was not from panic. It was from a dizzying, terrifying hope. I did not look away. I could not. I felt pinned by his gaze, by the unspoken thing that hung in the air between us. He leaned in, his movements slow, deliberate, giving me every opportunity to pull away. I did not move. I could not. I was frozen, mesmerized. His gaze dropped to my lips. My own lips parted on a silent, shaky breath. The world narrowed to the few inches between our faces. I could feel his breath on my skin, warm and smelling faintly of coffee. And then he kissed me. It was not a hard, demanding kiss. It was soft, tentative, a question asked with his lips instead of his voice. It was gentle and searching, and it sent a shockwave through my entire system. It was the taste of coffee and salt from my tears and something that was uniquely, intoxicatingly him. My eyes fluttered shut. My mind went completely blank, all the anxiety and fear and overthinking silenced by this one, impossible, overwhelming sensation. I brought a hand up to his chest, my fingers curling into the soft fabric of his shirt, holding on as if he were the only solid thing in a world that had tilted off its axis. He deepened the kiss slightly, a low sound rumbling in his chest, and I responded, my fear finally giving way to a yearning that was years in the making. It was a kiss that felt like a confession, like a homecoming. It was the shattering of the final wall, the end of my long, quiet isolation. It was everything. And when it ended, and he rested his forehead against mine, his breath mingling with my own, I knew, with a certainty that was both terrifying and exhilarating, that my orderly, predictable life was over, and I did not want it back. The morning after was a study in silence, a thick, suffocating silence that felt louder than any noise. I woke up alone in the guest bed, the sheets tangled around my legs, the memory of the previous night playing on a loop in my mind, the feel of his arms around me, the shock of his lips on mine, the profound, earth-shattering sense of connection. It felt like a dream, a beautiful, impossible dream. But the harsh morning light filtering through the window, told me it was real. And with that reality came a tidal wave of anxiety, cold and brutal. I crept downstairs like a thief, every creak of the floorboards sounding like a gunshot in the quiet house. Julian was in the kitchen, his back to me, making coffee. He was dressed for work, in clean jeans and a dark blue button-down shirt. He looked exactly as he always did, solid, capable, and completely calm. Too calm. "Morning," he said, without turning around. His voice was even, polite, professional. It was the voice he used on conference calls, not the soft, low murmur he had used last night. A shard of ice pierced through my chest. "Morning," I managed to choke out, my own voice a hoarse whisper. He turned then, a coffee mug in his hand. He did not meet my eyes. His gaze was fixed somewhere over my shoulder. He offered me the mug. "Coffee." I took it, our fingers brushing for a moment. This time, there was no spark. Or if there was, it was instantly extinguished by the chilling distance in his posture, in his gaze. He moved around the kitchen, his actions efficient and clipped, opening the fridge, grabbing a carton of milk. He was acting as if nothing had happened, as if he had not held me while I fell apart, as if he had not kissed me with a tenderness that had undone me completely. My mind, my greatest tormentor, kicked into overdrive. The anxiety spiral began, pulling me down into its dark, familiar vortex. He regretted it. Of course he regretted it. I had been a pathetic, crying mess. He had comforted me, a simple act of human kindness, and in my vulnerable state, I had misinterpreted everything. Or worse, he had felt pity for me, and the kiss had been a misguided attempt to soothe a hysterical person. He was probably embarrassed. He was probably trying to figure out how to gently ask me to leave without causing another scene. I had ruined everything. I had crossed a line, or let him cross one, and now the easy, quiet friendship that had been building between us was gone, replaced by this excruciating, awkward formality. The professional boundary was shattered, and the potential for anything more had been a fantasy, a brief, beautiful hallucination brought on by stress and emotional exhaustion. I felt a flush of shame so hot it made my skin prickle. I spent the day huddled in the guest room, my laptop open but the screen blank. I could not focus. I could not think. I just sat there, replaying the kiss, analyzing it from every angle, searching for the clue I had missed. Each time, I came to the same conclusion. It was a mistake. A beautiful, terrible mistake. I listened to his movements in the house, the sound of him leaving for a site visit, the sound of his return hours later. The emotional chasm between our two rooms felt wider and more impassable than the Grand Canyon. The physical proximity that had once been so charged and thrilling was now a form of exquisite torture. By late afternoon, I could not take it anymore. The silence was eating me alive. I had to leave. I had to remove myself from the situation, give him his space back, and allow us both to pretend that last night had never happened. I started packing my bag, my movements jerky and clumsy. I folded my shirts with shaking hands, my heart a leaden weight in my chest. Leaving felt like a kind of death, an amputation of a part of myself I had only just discovered. But staying felt impossible. I was zipping up my duffel bag when he appeared in the doorway. I had not heard him approach. He leaned against the doorframe, his arms crossed over his chest, his expression unreadable. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice quiet but laced with an undeniable tension. "I'm packing," I said, my voice flat, avoiding his eyes. "My landlord found me a temporary sublet. I'll be out of your hair in an hour." It was a lie, a clumsy, desperate lie, but it was all I had. He was silent for a long moment. I could feel his gaze on me, steady and intense. "Leo," he said, his voice low and firm. "Look at me." Slowly, reluctantly, I lifted my head and met his eyes. The calm, professional mask was gone. In its place was a maelstrom of emotions I could not decipher: confusion, frustration, and something else, something that looked almost like hurt. "We need to talk," he said. Those 4 words sent a fresh wave of dread through me. This was it. The letdown. The "I'm sorry if I gave you the wrong impression" speech. I braced myself, my hands clenching into fists at my sides. He pushed off the doorframe and walked into the room, closing the door softly behind him. The sound of the latch clicking into place seemed to seal my fate. He did not sit. He stood in the middle of the room, just a few feet away, and ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of agitation that was so out of character it startled me. "I've been an idiot all day," he began, his voice rough. "I'm sorry. I didn't know what to do, what to say." I stared at him, confused. This was not the speech I was expecting. "Last night," he continued, his eyes fixed on mine, "when I kissed you, I was terrified, Leo. Not because I regretted it, but because I was terrified that I had taken advantage of you. You were in a bad place. You were vulnerable, and I crossed a line. All day, I've been telling myself I was a monster, that I misread everything, that I had just made the biggest mistake of my life and completely ruined any chance of anything." The air left my lungs in a rush. I could only stare at him, my mind struggling to process his words. He had not been distant because he regretted it. He had been distant because he was scared. He had been spiraling, just like I had. "I haven't felt what I felt last night in a very, very long time," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Not since David. I didn't think I ever would again, and it scared the hell out of me. So I did what I always do when I'm scared. I put up a wall. I retreated into work, into being professional. It was cowardly, and I'm sorry." He took a step closer, his hands uncrossing, his posture open and vulnerable. "The truth is," he said, his voice thick with a raw honesty that stripped me bare, "I've had feelings for you since our first meeting. I admired your work, yes, but it was more than that. It was your quiet intensity, the way you see the world. I told myself it was just professional admiration. I told myself you were straight. I told myself 100 different things to keep you at a safe distance, because feeling anything else was too complicated, too terrifying. My own confession tumbled out of me, a torrent of words I had held back for months. "I thought you were straight," I whispered, the words feeling foolish now. "You mentioned David, and I assumed. I've been admiring you from a distance this whole time, telling myself you were completely unattainable. I thought last night was, I don't know, pity, a mistake." A sad, gentle smile touched his lips. "It wasn't a mistake, Leo. It was the first honest thing I've done in years." He closed the remaining distance between us, his hands coming up to cup my face, just as he had done the night before. His palms were warm against my skin, his thumbs stroking my cheekbones. "So," he murmured, his eyes searching mine, "can we try that again?" Without the panic and the fear. I did not need to answer with words. I leaned in, and he met me halfway. This kiss was different. It was not born of tears and desperation. It was sure, deep, and full of a profound, breathtaking relief. It was the feeling of a long and difficult journey finally reaching its destination. It was the quiet, steady click of two disparate, broken pieces finally fitting together. It was not the end of the storm. It was the calm, quiet, and hopeful morning after. It felt like coming home. The weeks that followed were a delicate, tentative dance of discovery. I moved into the temporary sublet my landlord had arranged, a sterile, furnished apartment that felt more like a hotel than a home. It did not matter. I spent most of my nights at Julian's brownstone anyway. The house, once a source of anxious, thrilling tension, was now becoming a place of comfort, a shared space that was starting to feel like ours. We were learning a new dynamic, navigating the transition from client and designer to something more. We did not name it, not at first. We let it grow organically, in the quiet spaces between words. We learned each other's rhythms. I learned that he hummed, a low, tuneless sound, when he was sketching. He learned that I needed a full hour of quiet solitude with my coffee before I could face the day. We were two solitary planets, slowly, carefully adjusting our orbits to accommodate the gravitational pull of the other. Our intimacy deepened not in grand gestures, but in 1,000 small, quiet moments. It was in the way he would bring me a blanket when I fell asleep on the sofa in his study. It was in the way I started organizing his chaotic collection of spices, putting them into alphabetical order, an act of gentle teasing that made him laugh. It was in the comfortable silences we could share, working in the same room for hours without needing to speak, the simple knowledge of the other's presence enough. Physical affection became a new, unspoken language. A hand on the small of my back as we passed in the kitchen, his fingers lacing with mine as we watched a movie, his thumb stroking lazy circles over my knuckles. One evening, as I was stressing over a new project, he came up behind me and began to massage my shoulders, his strong, capable hands working the knots of tension from my muscles. I leaned back against him, my eyes closing, and simply let myself be cared for, a sensation that was so foreign and so profoundly welcome. One Saturday, we were working on the front steps of the brownstone, sanding the new wood before staining it. The sun was warm on our backs, and the air smelled of sawdust and the faint promise of spring. I was clumsy with the sandpaper, my movements awkward and inefficient. Julian watched me for a moment, a fond, teasing smile on his face. "You're thinking too much," he said, his voice warm with amusement. He came and knelt behind me, his body pressing against my back. "Here, let me show you." He wrapped his arms around me, his hands covering mine, guiding my movements. Long, even strokes. With the grain. Feel the rhythm of it. We moved together, a single, coordinated entity. His chin rested on my shoulder, his breath warm against my neck. I was not thinking about the wood. I was thinking about the solid weight of him against me, the low rumble of his voice in my ear, the simple, perfect rightness of this moment. The world, which had once felt so sharp and threatening, had softened at the edges. Later that night, curled up on the sofa, a comfortable silence settled between us. He turned to me, his expression serious but gentle. "Are you sure you don't miss your old place?" he asked quietly. "Your order?" I thought about my old apartment, my fortress of solitude. I thought about the clean lines, the predictable silence, the carefully curated emptiness. It felt like a lifetime ago, a photograph of a person I no longer was. I looked around Julian's living room, at the pile of books on the coffee table, the half-finished painting leaning against one wall, the throw blanket tossed carelessly over the arm of the chair. It was messy. It was chaotic. It was full of life. "I built walls," I said, the words coming out slowly, a confession I had never made to anyone, not even myself. I thought they were keeping me safe, but they were just keeping me alone. I was a museum curator for a life no one was ever allowed to see. He did not say anything, just tightened his arm around me, pulling me closer. "You," I continued, my voice thick with an emotion I could not name. "You and your burst pipes and your beautiful, chaotic house. You didn't just break down the walls. You flooded the whole museum." A low chuckle rumbled in his chest. He pressed a soft kiss to my temple. "Is that a good thing?" I looked up at him, at the kind, steady eyes that had seen me at my absolute worst and had not turned away. I saw the man who had held me while I cried, who had been brave enough to be vulnerable, who had filled my silent, monochrome world with color and warmth and the scent of sawdust. I thought about the fear I had lived with for so long, the fear of mess, of chaos, of vulnerability, of connection. And I realized, with a sudden, breathtaking clarity, that the fear was gone. In its place was something quiet, something solid, something that felt an awful lot like peace. "Yeah," I whispered, leaning into his warmth. "It's a very good thing."